Welcome to the Pillow Talk sessions. My name is Jessica Gillingham and I am joined by my co-host, Kristian Lupinski.
Thanks, Jessica. And today we're joined by Philippa Wagner, founder and experienced design strategist at PeoplePlacesSpaces. Philippa specializes in redefining how we connect people with places, driving innovation and shaping exceptional guest experiences.
Absolutely. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. And with Philippa, we're going to talk about that shift of guest expectations and how you get that balance between being innovative, but also maintaining a brand identity. Philippa, thank you for coming on the show. We're really pleased to have you and looking forward to this conversation because I know you've got very different kind of takes and experiences. And I know for sure that in the prep call, I was very interested in hearing about it. So thank you. But before we sort of kick in, would you like to give us an introduction to yourself and your background? We'd love to hear it.
Well, thank you for having me. So yes, my name is Philippa Wagner and I'm the founder of PeoplePlacesSpaces, which is a creative strategy studio really focusing on the intersection of hospitality design and I guess human behaviour at the end of the day. Kind of born out of the closing of all the doors of all the hotels during the first lockdown of COVID. And yeah, just sort of bringing all the different elements of my career into one place, which was to, as the name suggests, look at people first, places and spaces, predominantly hospitality, a little bit around the edges of kind of workplace and retail, because of course those things are also interconnected, but very much just with that sort of people first mindset, but also how we can create those spaces and places for brands, investors and developers sort of globally to create brands and experiences that resonate with what people will want tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, looking at that background, we're going to touch a little bit on each of those things. But to kick off today's conversation, I kind of want to start with the changing guest expectations. 5 years ago, everybody went in lockdown. We kind of built our work from home studios and things like this. And hotels were that place to experience the luxuries we didn't have at home. Now we do. And now how these expectations have changed, from what you've seen, what are today's guests looking for? And, how are these hospitality brands adapting to meet these new demands?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Hotels were that place where you'd go and have that incredibly large bed with the amazing bed sheets with, kind of like a very high count quality. And it would be a sort of an escapism from your day to day. Whereas during lockdown, we were suddenly able to get the sort of Michelin star food delivered to our home, and we all spent a lot of money on those nice bed sheets and those nice towels to make us feel a little bit more kind of connected with our everyday. And so, yeah, hotels and hospitality has really had to shift. I guess pre-COVID and for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've still continued to hear a lot of people talk about hotels as community and certain brands calling themselves community brands, but community hotels. But I don't think it's really until now that the hotel industry is really recognising the role it has to play and the shift it's having within our kind of lives. It actually is the place to kind of deliver social wellness, community and connectivity. And actually the industry has almost a responsibility to deliver on that, because I can't sort of think of specific statistics off the top of my head, but through research I'm doing for some clients at the moment, the stats are really high. People are saying they want to go to a hotel to connect. They see that if they're going to spend their time or their money with a brand, they want to feel like kind of a kinship with them. And so it really is about that much, much deeper connected value sharing that people are looking for from hospitality. And as a result, hotels can no longer trade on the big name above the door, or can only, trade on we've got the best loyalty program out there, because actually loyalty isn't really real when it comes to points on your card. Loyalty is when it's like what happens when you really connect with the brand. And so guests are looking for brands that they would like to have a dinner party with. There's somebody that would sit at the table next to them, they can have a conversation with, that they share values, that they can chat with, and just feel that there is something deeper than just somewhere that you put your head for the night.
That's all such sort of interesting things, that kind of community being and connection, really, isn't it? It's connection. And on this podcast, one of the things that we really love to explore is how hospitality and hospitality principles, I guess is what we might call it, how that sort of is also now within other places that we stay. So whether that might be student accommodation, or if we were in retirement villages, or the service department world, or even if we were sort of growing beyond the student to co-living. And I know that you also do some work in some of the kind of the build to rent living sectors. So in terms of the way that the resident expectations have changed over the last 5 years in particular, looking for that connection, and or even like knowing that we've got that stuff at home, so we do need it in everywhere that we stay, and sort of how expectations, maybe even with students or whatever, has changed. Like, where are you seeing those similarities across the other kinds of lodging verticals that you advise in?
I mean, absolutely. I think we're seeing it across all of them. It's interesting, isn't it? Because rewind maybe 5+ years and somebody said, oh, what industry you work in? You say, I work in hospitality. They'd automatically go, oh, you work in hotels. But actually, as you've just listed out, there is a huge bandwidth of what hospitality is. Now, of course, hotels and restaurants and bars would kind of fall into that. But the build to rent market, which is obviously huge, student living, although I personally think students should live in an awful place to start with, because you've got to start working your way up. But that's a whole nother conversation. But, it's about the expectations of hospitality at all levels. So another thing that kind of connects to the sort of the hospitality in the wider context is that the way that we live our lives is changing. So that we're living in very uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen, what's happening, kind of from a climate point of view, from a political point of view. We're also in this time of a demographic flip, where for the first time in 2024, we have more 65-year-olds and over than we do 15 and under, which means that we are not only living for longer, but we are kind of older as a kind of cohort. And as a result of all of these things mixing together, we are reaching kind of traditional markers of society in different ways. So people are getting married, if at all, at a later stage. They are perhaps not having children, or having children later. Small things like getting their driving licenses are going up. So what's happening is people's discretionary spend is shifting. They're going, well, I don't actually know if I can ever afford the house to buy, even if I wanted to. So maybe I'll spend my money more on me living in the moment, that kind of YOLO attitude. And with that kind of leans back into this, well, if I'm a student, I don't want to live in an awful accommodation. I actually want to live quite nicely. So, or retirement is no longer about being old. Aging is about becoming. It's not about being kind of forgotten in society. So actually we're starting to see these amazing complexes which are opening up, where you've got students living with retirees and then everybody in between. And it's flattening out our expectations. And so as a result of that, we're seeing that shift in that wider hospitality universe that you talked about, where it's like, if I'm going to spend my time, which is my life, at this point in time, I want to have amazing things. And therefore, those cues are being drawn from what we would traditionally look to a hotel, an older kind of style hospitality industry, and have gone the nice bed sheets, the artwork on the walls, the room service. We're actually pulling those things through and saying, well, why can't we have them always? And I think that's really what it's wrapped up in, that sense of, yeah, I'm living for now. I might as well enjoy it while I can, and have all the benefits that come with that. And of course, hospitality by its very nature is about caring for other people, about making them feel as comfortable as you can.
So it's so interesting, because it does shift the role of hotels. Like you said earlier, it's like it's not enough just to have the lovely Egyptian cotton sheets, because we're kind of used to that. It's not so much the treat that we might have looked to a hotel stay before. It's sort of table stakes, maybe, in a way. So that the hotel is there to do more for us than just provide a bed and nice sheets and bathrobes. Is that what you mean? Or is that how you're sort of seeing things? It is much more than just providing that service.
100%. I mean, all hotels sell sleep. at the end of the day. Whether they sell good sleep or bad sleep is actually more often not often dependent on you as a person, whether you're having a good night's sleep or not. It's not necessarily whether you've got the king size bed and the kind of, all the trappings that go with it. So it's about differentiating. And there's also a plethora of choice out there. Also, how we choose choose where to stay is changing. It used to be that obviously you went through the traditional tour operators for traveling. Now we know it's obviously all the OTAs, and now shifting through to social media. TikTok announced informally this week, but it's coming, that they're going to have a direct to purchase for travel through their platform. And we know Instagram are making noises around the same thing. So it's like, how do you create something that is more than just somewhere to sleep? And that's exactly why hotels are a lifestyle. And you've obviously, the lifestyle hospitality category has been growing a lot over the kind of the last 10 years, but it's more than that. Coupled with the decline of kind of like organised collectives like going to the pub, religion, those sorts of things, they've all been in a decline as well. So actually the hotel is becoming this centralised location where you create connection and community in a nice environment, in a space that talks to you, that is designed in style that you like, or the kind of guests that come there have a shared love for that. So therefore you've got a kind of kinship before you've even sort of started the kind of like the journey staying with them. So yeah, it's so much more than what it was, but at the same time it still has to deliver those baselines really, really well. And then again, that's super interesting when you've got the likes of Zedwell Hotels, for instance, which is all about, staying there to disconnect. Silent rooms, no windows. The whole idea is you go there to sleep, because during the daytime you've been out shopping in central London and you want the kind of calm, to some of the kind of the retreats that are happening where you go and stay at a retreat for 2 days or maybe a couple of weeks, and you learn craft and you get involved in knowledge and kind of bettering yourself. So it's kind of, there's so many layers that you have to add to just being somewhere to stay when you're traveling.
I just got to say something on that. I just spent 3 nights in a hotel in Saigon that had no windows. I'm never doing that again. That for me is a no-no, is no windows. I'm afraid I need my windows.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, and the MMNT project that I've been working on in Berlin, we're testing out there 3 of the room types have no windows, and that was done for a few reasons. One's because it enables that project, that kind of brand, to roll out into properties that were never designed to be hotels, so it can be a more sustainable brand, so it can go into old shopping centres or old offices which obviously weren't designed with the window spaces, but also it enables you to use a smaller space and to be more efficient in that room, because having a window can be inefficient in terms of a guest leaves the window open but leaves the air conditioning running all day. But it's very interesting because when we were testing it, lots of guests didn't necessarily know when they first walked into the space it was windowless, and it'd be sort of, some people would walk in and they'd feel it before they'd even seen it, and they were absolutely no, and then other people would be like, oh, I didn't actually realise until a few minutes in that there wasn't a window, but it's not my ideal choice, but actually I'm okay with that. So again, it's super interesting, isn't it? But it's also knowing what that product is for. If I was staying in a beautiful country at a beach resort and there was no window, I mean, that would be 100% no. But if I'm working somewhere in an urban environment and I wanted to having an amazing night's sleep there, but I want to spend the rest of my time out and about, then the windowless room makes complete sense.
I think we should back up just a bit, because I want to, for our audience, to know a little bit more about it. Maybe you can discuss MMNT, or Moment in Berlin, because as you mentioned, it was experimenting with innovative hospitality solutions. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about that project and what kind of things that you found by doing it.
Yeah, so as the many people in the industry were, sort of as we were kind of coming out of the early stages of lockdown, a lot of the hospitality industry were looking to the world and saying, well, what's happened? Will hotels still exist? Will people travel in the same way? What next? And TFE Hotels, who are an Australian hotel developer and operator, had their European team were looking to kind of understand what the next level of travel was going to be. And they came to me and said they've got a small retail space attached to next to one of their hotels in Berlin, and they wanted to set it up as a test lab. to really, to test some of these hypotheses about smaller rooms, maybe more sustainable spaces, and the future traveller. It was an amazing brief. These briefs don't come along very often, and particularly after being locked down for a while, it was wonderful. And they gave me the opportunity to really develop and define what this would be. So we created essentially a kind of future view of travellers. We identified a mindset of future travellers, which we kind of called the kindred travellers, and unpacked the value expectations that they would have of travelling in certain situations, which would be people who were leaning more into sort of what was being talked about a lot at that time, the digital nomads. Obviously, we kind of widened that context. The fast track of sustainability and how important that was going to be for travel, that people would still travel. Of course they would, because people are curious and work would require them to, but actually the length of stay would travel, how they spent their time travelling would change, and also just trying to understand how we could be more efficient with real estate, because we were watching what was happening with offices no longer being the office, people going and working from home, but also retail had been on a huge decline. So lots of what the Germans were calling white elephants, which is the kind of shopping centres on the crux of a kind of high street, being empty, and how we could utilise those. And so what was born was MMNT, or Moment, which was all about sort of marrying up this idea of every traveller as having a moment in time. Wherever you are in the world, whatever hotel you're in a time zone doing your own thing. So in any hotel, there could be 50 people all in sort of similar rooms. One person would be showering, somebody be sleeping, somebody working. They're all having their own sort of separate moment, coupled with approaching the testing process in a different way for how we understand how people utilise the spaces. We didn't want to create a hotel and then do a post-stay survey. We wanted to create a way of testing in the moment feelings and experiences, so you can really capture what works and doesn't work in a space. So ultimately, we created a 6-bedroom, micro, fully functioning working hotel that is like, when you develop a real hotel, what you do is you develop the hotel, and then you create what's a mock-up or a model room, and it replicates exactly what the room is going to look like. But nobody sleeps in it. It doesn't actually work. It's great for taking pictures of, and maybe housekeeping can wander around it. But you don't really know whether you can tuck that sheet behind the bed comfortably and get housekeeping in and out quickly, or whether somebody likes or dislikes the space. And so that's really what this was about. And we developed what's called MMNT Moment Berlin Lab. So it was set up as a lab. We've since discovered it's the world's first and only micro hotel working lab, which is fantastic. And over a sort of 2.5 month period, we invited guests to come and stay. But what was really wonderful about it is we went back to those kindred travellers I mentioned before, the hypotheses of future travellers, and we found people who identified against the values that we created, and invited them to come and stay. We did that by just teasing on social media, putting it out through Instagram and TikTok, and sort of saying, if you're interested, does this resonate with you? Got people to answer a series of questions. Depending on what they answered, we said, yep, you're in, or no, you're out. And then invited them to stay between 1 and 3 nights. And during that time, they gave us, in the moment, live feedback. So we used a digital platform called Recollective, where they were given a series of tasks. So, for instance, their first impressions task, a bit like you see on social media, on TikTok, they do like an unboxing of, I went shopping today and this is what I bought. We wanted that same expression as you walk into the room. How did it make them feel? What were the first words that they said? Which was absolutely amazing, because you don't get that. If you send a post-stay survey, how did you sleep? Oh, that was about 4 days ago. I don't remember how I slept. Or what did you like in the room? Oh, I like the pink cushion. It's not the same as somebody walking and going, oh, wow, this feels really spacious. Or, oh, it's much smaller than I expected. And then being able to unpack those kind of qualitative things. And then we got a series of tasks over the period of time that we got them to do. And we were testing out different designs, different experiences on property. So it's, absolutely fascinating. Learnt a huge amount of information. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Not so much ugly, but, lots of different things. And that information and those insights are being collated and interrogated, and are now being worked on as the kind of the blueprint for the rollout of Moment as a global hotel product.
It's so fascinating. And one of the things I'm thinking of is tech companies or hoteliers, when they're thinking about putting in new tech into their business, they'll often develop a sandbox where they can test it, and it's all digital. It's not an actual sandbox and it's not in an actual hotel, but they really kind of do that sandbox experiment to see whether the tech will work together. And it's like that, isn't it? You're doing a real life sandbox of the actual physical hotel with physical people, which is really interesting. And then, so what were some of the insights that came out? Is it like, 30% of people cannot stand windowless rooms, but there's 10% that we can, that will be all right as long as the price is right and the actual room. And so that's one of the things I wanted to say. And the other thing I did want to also reflect on is that recording the feelings. Now, for me, when the first thing that I do, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is I go into the bathroom and I go and have a look what the bathroom. I'm a woman. I like a nice bathroom.
Oh, I look at the bathroom as well.
You do as well.
Place,
Yeah. So go and sort of see, and either it's a wow or it's a So anyway, I wanted to sort of reflect on that. But what were the sort of the insights, and did they match what you, and I guess because this is so new, you and the hotelier TFE would not necessarily know what you were hoping to get from the results of this lab. So I just would love to know a little bit more about what you understood, and was it what you wanted to understand?
So there's sort of lots of points to this. I think the first thing that was really interesting is when we asked them to walk around, enter the room, they had to do it with a video. So they were walking around. So when they went into the bathroom, and you're absolutely right, curiosity is a human nature. Everybody did do that. What we got was exactly that, understanding the flow that people do. So some of our rooms have kitchenettes in as well. So they went straight to the cupboards and tried to open the cupboards. They were locked. I'll come back to explain that locking bit in a minute. So we were able to capture visually what they were seeing and the language, the words that they were using. We also asked them to type in, after that first task, 3 words that they would use to describe the room and their experience. This was really fascinating. In our original brief that came from all the work that we did at PeoplePlacesSpaces and we put together for the interior architects, we had 2 interior architects working with us, Acme, who are our kind of lead architects, and BWM, who did one of the rooms with us. When we gave them the original briefs, we had words in there like calming, cozy, things like that. They weren't public words. They weren't words that we ever played out on our social media presence or on our website, but they were the words our guests played back to us. Sanctuary, things like that. And that was fascinating because we'd made a really clear choice, and it was in the brief from us, was we want to use the colour green because the scientists have told us that green is great for calming you, for your cognitive ability. We said we wanted to only use plaster instead of paint in the rooms because plaster is natural, it's great for acoustics, it cleans the VOCs out the air, it cleans kind of all the nasties out the air, but it also creates a kind of a natural vibration in the room that helps people sleep better. All the materials we chose were natural materials, or they were recycled in a kind of reuse and reduce process. And the feeling that we thought we would get back from that was played back to us. So that was absolutely fascinating. What was also great within that was, people have a love-hate for everything. People have opinions, and they're absolutely right. But this isn't about our opinion. This is about the collective telling us where we're right and wrong, but equally us then going, yeah, but we stand by this because this is our brand pillars and our brand values. What's important of this testing was to not say we're aggregating everything and we're going to go with the masses of what people tell us, because then we'll never have something that stands for anything. But where the value really came in is when they absolutely played to us and retold us that we were right, but equally where we were wrong. And I think that's really important as well. We did build in mistakes on purpose. We did things like in the smallest room that's 11 metres squared, we put the biggest bed in there and the biggest vanity unit. Now, when we first said we wanted to do that, we got looked at weirdly by the operational team. They're like, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. And we're like, because we want to play with perception. Because just because it's the smallest room, it doesn't have to always mean cheap. Small can mean efficient. experiential and beautiful at the same time. And actually, it is a windowless room, but people didn't walk in there and feel always that it wasn't. And again, this is what's super interesting, to your point about that statistic of percentages. More often than not, people did or didn't notice whether there was a window. But where the real value came in was listening to someone's video of themselves. So for instance, if somebody said, oh my God, there's no window, I don't like the idea of a window. But then they would turn and say, however, oh, I really like that. Oh, and that's really interesting. So for instance, we've got this big lamp that we chose, which looks like a moon or a sun. And the idea was to mimic nature from outside without having a window. What we didn't want to do is have a screen on the window which was showing mountains, because that's a lie. What we were doing is we're celebrating it's windowless, but we're still touching into some of those cues of human nature. And so somebody would be like, oh, it's windowless, I wouldn't have chosen that, but oh, I've got the moon above my head, wow. And then you can start to take the different levels of qualitative data that they're giving us. If we had asked them a question, would you sleep in a windowless room? We know the answer would be very high percentages of no. But actually what we start to see is there's a bandwidth of when you can actually make it acceptable or not. And that was super interesting. And then the other mistakes we made, I made that reference, that point of cupboards being locked. So we wanted to test some operational hypotheses, which we knew the guests would dislike. But from an operational perspective, and at the end of the day, it's an operator behind this, they were like, if we can do this, it'd be fantastic. So in an apartment hotel or a suite where you've got a kitchen, when someone checks out, regardless of whether you've drunk anything out of any of the glasses or touched any of the knives and forks, it all has to be washed for hygiene reasons, which takes time and money. And also, if you wash everything every time, it wears its useful life down. So our hypothesis was, well, if we lock that cupboard, lock it away, but give guests the access to it if they want to use it, when housekeeping come in, if it's still locked, it hasn't been touched, they don't need to clean it. But if it's been opened, we'll make the assumption it's been used. Brilliant idea, works beautifully operationally. And the way it worked with the guests, they have an app, and they can just see the cupboard they want, the thing they want. So it's like, okay, I want my crockery. So they'd slide the button with the crockery, the door would open, they get access to it. But as you pointed out, the first thing you want to do when you walk into a room is open everything and have a look. So that was really interesting. And so we have to make decision now, and I'm not allowed to tell you what decision we've made. But, decisions as to, do we lean into operational and say, actually, if you educate your customers in advance, if you stay at a moment, this will happen. Therefore, you can't look. But if you go onto our social media, you can always have a look at videos of people using it. Or you go, no, the guests didn't like it, and they'll take a hit operationally. But so that's really what is super interesting, to help the business weigh up where it puts its sort of stake in the ground and the reasons why.
One of the things here also is it's that weighing up what's guest experience and what's operationally important.
Yep.
So it's figuring out that balance there, rather than making assumptions as well.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, going back to what we were talking about before, guest experience is what differentiates. There's so many brands out there. There's some amazing brands and there's some really awful brands and there's everything in between. But what I say is awful is somebody else is brilliant. And so, that's the beauty of it. There are certain kind of brands that may not really excite you, but if they do what you want, which is having a great night's sleep with great blackout curtains and right next to the airport, you tick a box. But you would choose to go and stay in that hotel if you wanted the best breakfast in bed of another occasion. So what the brand experience has to resonate with why you're there and what you're looking for. And that's really what we do at People, Places, Spaces. It's all about the brand experience. We develop our brand DNA kind of approach is all about building brand experience pillars. There's the brand pillars that sit internally and externally, but there's those brand experience. It's those guest journeys that the emotionally and physically will happen, because those are those touch points of wow or and again, it's to that point of making a decision. if I educate my guests in a really interesting, exciting way about something that might not be such a great guest experience, but I've given them the reasons why, because operationally it's better, therefore I can charge you less for your room, or which is a very functional experience principle, or actually if by locking our cupboards we are more sustainable, joined together we can charge you less, we're more sustainable, oh, and by the way, you get this, it's a kind of unique approach, then suddenly your guest experience becomes a positive because you've repositioned it. And it also allows TFE and the kind of the wider business to break assumptions, because that was the other thing that was really fascinating when I first started on this project. TFE kept me away from everybody internally. Within, I had a kind of small team of people that I work with, but mostly they were like, don't get involved with our ops team, don't get involved with our, other teams, because they will tell you this is how they do it and this is why it works. So we were able to come in and say, look, we're going to try and break convention, because it's very easy to get a sort of stuck into that rhythm of it works, so why change it? And by breaking things, which to your point about that's how the technology industry works. But when you're working with bricks and mortar, it's very difficult to take a risk on a 150 key hotel. You can't suddenly go, let's just try this out. If we'd gone to any business and said, we want to build 150 rooms, we want to make them all 11 meters squared and windowless and put the widest bed in there and the biggest vanity, they'd be like, don't be ridiculous. Now, we could come back and say, okay, well, maybe we make 60% of our rooms like that because we know this makes sense. But as long as you've got this as your room type around it, then you can create a kind of balanced product. So it's very rich in that sense as well. And that's really where the values come for TFE, not just for the rollout of Moment, which is great in itself. It was never supposed to be a brand. It was never supposed to be a product they were going to roll out. It was supposed to be a test lab. But because it's been so well received and some great learnings, it's going to be it is their next product, but also the learnings are leading into other products in their portfolio too.
Yeah, super interesting. And for any of our listeners, I recommend going over to YouTube and typing in MMNT Berlin. There's some videos up there, really interesting, and how it was put together, the kind of background on it. So I recommend our listeners check that out. Now, you mentioned brand, and I want to talk a bit about brand DNA, as you were kind of alluding to it a bit. How important is it maintaining distinct brand DNA in hospitality? But, as technology changes and guests' expectations change, how do they balance this innovation and tradition? And, how do they ensure that these new concepts kind of remain true to the brand's identity?
I mean, it's hugely important. As I said before, there's so many brands out there and, we're sort of oversaturated. It's about sort of keeping true to yourself as well, because we've got this such homogeny, the kind of the world of Instagram, everything looks the same. And it is about staying true to your brand DNA. And I think this is an interesting tension and debate I've been having with people around the lab and the kind of the mindset of, well, you're opening up and asking people to tell you what it should be. We are not asking them to tell us what it should be. We're just using it as a validation tool, I guess, to help us right and wrong. Because if you don't have a brand DNA that you believe in, that you feel is unique, then you just become meh like everything else. So it is hugely, hugely important. But it's also about understanding who you want to talk to and who you don't care about talking to. Because often, a lot of the time, brands will want to talk to everybody, because at the end of the day, bums on seats or, heads on pillows is money. But the minute you do that, if you talk to everybody, you're talking to nobody, because you don't know who you're cutting through. And the brands that succeed are those who they don't care. They go, fine, if you're not interested, don't worry, I'll talk to somebody else. And that's where the value comes in. So yeah, having that brand DNA, but it's also about making sure it evolves and not stagnating, because that's the other thing. Brands who are very successful in that, they stagnate. They sit back and go, oh, well, we've done it, haven't we? And everybody's going to keep coming to us. And it's shifting that mindset of, if we build it, they will come, because they won't come. It's if they hear you, they will come. But if in order for them to hear you, you need to be talking the same language, which comes back to those value expectations. So it's about, and that's what we do, when we work with clients, is we define that brand DNA, and then we create those experience principles that run around the outside of it, because those are the things that people hear and see and feel. And then it enables you to kind of evolve over time and make sure that you're moving forward, but always one step ahead of your customers, because otherwise you end up just, again, stagnating.
One of the things that always kind of interests me, I guess, or I've got curiosity about, is how brands, are able to offer an experience to an individual through their brand DNA, but also through the experience that they're delivering, a very customized experience. How do they marry that up with the fact that they do need to be standardized in many ways? Like, whether it is on the practicalities like housekeeping and making sure that the cupboards have the exact things that they're supposed to have in them. So that's one thing, is how do you marry up customizing, putting customer first, personalized experiences, having a brand that really speaks to an individual, to the fact that it does need to be standardized. The other question is that I know that people are looking for localized experiences and they're wanting to feel that they're part of something local. So when I go to Prague, I want to feel like I'm in Prague. I don't want to feel like I'm in a hotel that could be in London or could be in Rome or wherever. So, but a lot of brands are global, and so how, or they'll want to scale, they don't want to just be a hotel in Prague or a lab in Berlin. So those two things, how do you see they kind of marry up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. It's like, personalization is something that everyone's talking about. How do we personalize? And AI is going to help us personalize, la-di-da. But that's not business. That's, high-end luxury. Yes, maybe you can get away with that. But as you sort of start to come down. But actually, personalization doesn't have to be about me as an individual. Personalization, if you take it up almost a kind of level, is by already resonating with that community of people who've heard me because of the brand DNA. Already we've kind of cut through some of the things that I don't need, which means we're getting closer into it, feeling more personally tailored to my values and my expectations. And therefore, by its very nature, I've chosen to stay with that brand, with brand A over brand B, because that's kind of, they lean into the value. So you're already starting to get there, which then allows you to be more standardized, because if you try and deliver the pillows that every single customer wants, and there was a whole plethora, wasn't there, of hotels who did that. We've got these amazing pillow menus. It's just not possible, because everybody, and also on a Monday, I might be wanting a soft pillow, but on Thursday, I'm still the same person, but I might want a hard pillow because I pulled my back or something. So, the layers you get to are just too much. So anybody who starts to say it's all about personalization, no. Where personalization does come in will be where tech does help step in, which is knowing that I've stayed there before and knowing that, and the data it's got on, that I always like to stay on floor 2 because it's got a better view. Of course, we can support those sorts of things. And I've been working with, actually with TFE, one of their main brand. It's sort of 60% of their revenue, their business is Adina, which is a global brand. And I've been working with them repositioning their brand over the last year or so, which you'll start to see being rolled out 2025. And one of those points was exactly your point about local versus neighbourhood. So they are the only international Australian hospitality brand. In Australia, they're known to be Australian. Over here, in Europe, everyone thinks they're German because they're most of their products in Germany. So we've been working very hard with them to understand, what does that mean to bring Australian-ness, is what we've been talking about it, into the kind of European market, without hitting people over the head with what traditionally they've done, which is kangaroos and Vegemite and things like that. But also, how do you, at the same time, not just bring Australia and shove it into Europe, but also go, well, we're in Munich, we're in Berlin, we're in London, wherever those destinations are. So how do you recognise that as well? And so it is about neighbourhood and localisation. Another client I've been working with, who are opening a hotel in Woodwharf, Virtus Edit, we actually started talking to them about borougness, because they are about being in a borough. So even getting down another layer, because they're London, it's Canary Wharf, but it's the new area of Canary Wharf, but actually it's part of Tower Hamlets. So what does that mean? And it comes down to so many different levels of, making sure you support the local communities around you. If you have art on your walls, make sure it's local artists. If you've got local suppliers, support them. It's about telling those stories. and sort of a nice anecdote actually for one of the hotels in one of the Adina hotels in an area called Wiesbaden, just outside of Frankfurt. And we were trying to find a story to tell about them. And we discovered that there's this apple cider that's quite famous from the area, and it was always drunk with these sort of traditional jugs that were kind of over time have kind of got lost. So what we've done is we've brought some of those jugs in and put them into the foyer lobby area with a little sign saying, want to know a little bit about the area? We've created a welcome guide, so when you enter the room, we tell you the story about the location, not what you can find on Google, but storytelling of things that only the people who live in the area know. It's also about recommendations of food and drink in the area. Again, not what you can find on the general, but it's like our teams, this is where they love to go, for a quick bite to eat. It's those subtleties of locals versus global. But what it does mean that you can still have the standardized of the towels that, go everywhere, the sheets that go everywhere, the interior design, but you just sort of pepper in a little bit of new location and new storytelling.
Yeah, firstly, we've had Freya, who heads up operations for Verters, on the show. So there's a very good podcast for anyone listening to this want to hear back, where she talks about Verters and Verters Edit. But what I was thinking about, what came to mind is, Waterstones. And for our American listeners, it's a chain bookshop that we have in the UK. And you go in and, a Waterstones, wherever you are, whether you're in Glasgow, Bath, London, Brighton, is the same experience. But what's different is all the staff say, these are the books we're reading this week. This is what we're recommending. So they have whole sections that are on, these are our favourite Gothic novels. These are our favourite travel books. This is where we're travelling. This is what we're reading. So I guess it's a bit like that, isn't it? It's kind of that standard, here's a brand, but we can localise it where we are locally in a standardized way as well, in a funny way.
Exactly. And I think something that's really key as well is lots of hotels jumped on the bandwagon of what the Hoxton were doing originally, which was, creating a community and a community hotel. Now, I'm ex-Ennismore, who own the Hoxton and worked very closely with them. And what's really interesting is when you go to a hotel and there's the community events that happen, mostly it's locals who come to these events. It's not the guests. So when guests come and stay with you, they're not looking to be embedded into a local community. But what they do want to do is feel like they've actually visited the location. They don't want that, as you say, that homogeny. But they also, at the same time, do want that standardization, because if you're going to a foreign country, you're spending some money, you want to know that you feel safe, like, I know it's going to have X, Y, and Z quality. And so it's not about thrusting people into the community and saying, right, you need to go and talk to, him round the corner because he lives here and he's going to, show you the locality. It's more about, I want to feel like when someone says, how was that borough that you stayed in, you can talk about it versus just that, that kind of like, I could be anywhere in the world right now, because that doesn't satisfy. And the more we see that travellers are having to make hard choices about travelling. If I do travel, I am going to have a global impact. Therefore, if I travel, I'm going to travel for longer. We've seen this happening, and it is changing the kind of the landscape. Equally, if you're staying for longer, then you want to be embedded in that locale a little bit more. So, I think we're going to continue to see the importance of neighbourhood, borougness, all of those things coming. But it's not a tokenistic thing. It has to feel authentic. Brand by brand, team by team.
Well, it's really interesting. And I think we have time for like one more question. And I think this will kind of close out today's conversation quite nicely. During our discovery call, you mentioned that hospitality is like the fashion industry in terms of trends and adaptability. How can operators or owners stay ahead of these trends, and, what lessons can other living sectors learn from this approach?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two sides to why, sort of, when I made that reference to the fashion industry, it's exactly as you said, but it's also that hospitality has almost become the darling industry that fashion was sort of back sort of 20 years ago. It's because people have shifted to experiences. The experience economy has been going on for a long time, and the hospitality industry has facilitated that, and it's going to continue, and we are going to continue to see this spend on, you only live once kind of mindsets, and actually wanting to have an amazing time, as we sort of touched on at the beginning of this conversation. the hospitality industry does need to be more mindful of trends. It's super interesting because it's a slow industry in so many ways, because it's bricks and mortar, and from the concept of I've got this new brilliant idea to build a hotel and this is the brand and this is the experience, to opening the doors can be anywhere from, absolute fastest, be 18 months if you're taking an existing hotel and flipping it, all the way to sort of 10, 15, 20 years if you're going to take something on that kind of journey, because it's the build and everything else that kind of goes around it. So as an industry, historically, it's sort of stayed away from what would be seen as trends, because trends have always been seen as fast and fashionable. But that's trending versus trends. Trends at the end of the day, and it's almost a word that I hate using, but I've worked in the trend forecasting industry, so it's kind of part of who I am. But trends are just manifestations of cultural shifts, of what's happening and what we as people are looking for. And so the hospitality industry, because it's about caring for people and being around people, is the front line really of culture. And is increasingly kind of becoming that way. And that's why we're seeing the industry starting to embrace the kind of long range trends. At the same time, the industry is very much pushing back, and they should push back on not packing up on fast trends, because what happens in a lot of hotels is they'll have their FF&E cycle, which is their fixtures and fittings. And some of them can be on 3-year cycles, some of them can be on 10-year cycles. We want them to get to longer cycles, because every time you refurbish a room, you're throwing all that stuff out, and it could be perfectly good. But because the trend has moved, the colour has moved, the texture has moved, you don't want the industry to become too trendy. What you want is it to be this cultural shift of how you change the experience, not necessarily the bricks and mortar and the interior design. It's those services that you deliver. It's some of the technology shifts. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how AI is, permeating everything, we still need to sleep. We still need to eat. We still need to connect with people. We still need to feel things. So hotels will continue to take that element of it and those kind of values, and keep moving the industry forward through that, I guess.
Do you see co-working spaces? This is one of the more recent ones. Do you see that as something that's going to become like a long-lasting standard? Because I know you have experience on working with co-working spaces with Huxton, so maybe you can tell us just a little bit about that trend. And do you think that that's going to stick around based on our current lifestyles?
Yeah, I mean, Working From, which was the co-working product that we developed for the Hoxton, we were developing that before COVID, and one of the strap lines we came up with at the time was, it's like working from home but without the distractions of your cat. Now, this was before we all started working from home and were distracted by the cat, the washing machine, your husband, all the things that happened. And that was because we were tracking it from a cultural perspective. We were seeing that this was already happening. We were seeing that people were going, well, actually, I can, because of technology, because of the way the world was changing, I can work from somewhere that is not my office. Oh, and by the way, I can be traveling here and I can do this. So yes, absolutely, this is going to continue. We are seeing a pushback of back into the office, and the offices that are coming back are no longer just about desk after desk. They are offering hospitality. They are offering hairdressers on site. They're offering restaurants. They're offering childcare, doggy care. They're offering the things that you would traditionally go to hospitality for. So the blurring of the edges. So it's no trend. Well, okay, I'm going to say that's not the case. A trend can start and stop. But cultural shifts are always an evolution of an evolution. So all we're going to do is start to see those subtle changes coming. Some people are moving faster, some people are moving slower. So like with everything, fast forward sort of 10 years' time, there won't be a differentiator between staying in a hotel and going and working, because we're going to be working 24 hours. We're going to be, wanting to have a space that facilitates us outside of our home. But more importantly, a lot of those places will be our homes. Going back to exactly what we talked about at the beginning, Jessica, you talked about student housing and retirement spaces. And I think a really nice example, and I can't remember the name of it, I'm afraid, but there's a cafe in Washington, D.C., which is on the street, public facing, which is just like a great styled coffee shop. But actually, it is the coffee shop for a retirement home. And they're actually creating that sort of crossover between one world and another, which would have years ago seemed completely separate. But at the end of the day, people want coffee, they want community and connectivity. And that's a really great example of where those walls no longer exist.
So where I live, which is Bath, we actually have a brand new kind of retirement home with a coffee shop within it now. And it's and you know, there are people going in there, but it's in that building. So it's really interesting, isn't it?
And, you know, if somebody had told you that 5 years ago that would be the case, you would be like, but why? But it's because culture, you know, as people, we need certain things, and those human needs to connect, belong, to play, to, you know, all those things, they don't change, they exist. What changes is our responses to what's going on in the world around us, and as a reaction to that, brands and services create something that delivers against it. And ultimately, that's what we do as a business. We track those, identify those, and help signpost those for our clients.
Yeah, brilliant, Philippa. I would love to speak more with you, particularly on the kind of the other lodging sectors and what you've learned about those. And so maybe we have to have this conversation another time. But I think we're kind of time to wrap up this conversation. But what I'd love to hear is anything coming up for you, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more?
What's coming up for me? Lots of interesting projects for 2025, which is super exciting. How they can get in touch with me, I mean, is PeoplePlacesSpaces. Check us out on our website. You can obviously DM me through Instagram as well, or, you know, just kind of use the old-fashioned way, find my phone number and give me a ring. In terms of events and things, so the Festival of Hospitality is kicking off, and I will be doing some things with the Festival of Hospitality. I'm also over in Milan in May at a co-working meets hospitality conference, where I'll be talking further about some of this sort of things that we've been talking about, and just generally, hopefully, popping up, you know, kind of here, there, and everywhere. And from MMNT and Moments perspective, again, we're about to go into testing phase 2 with that. But again, I think, you know, if you want to understand a little bit more about how we work, it's almost like that lab is a physical manifestation of our approach. So you can go ahead and book a stay in a windowless room, or they have rooms with windows too.
I might do that, absolutely. So Philippa, thank you so much.
Pleasure, thank you very much. Lovely to chat with you both.
And that wraps it up for us today. So thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of Pillow Talk Sessions. To stay connected and catch every new episode, do us a favor and head over to pillowtalksessions.com to subscribe. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more insights and interviews with leaders who are shaping the future of hospitality, multifamily living, and community-driven spaces. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Pillow Talk Sessions.